So we got Bobby Kennedy, who appeared before the Senate yesterday for his confirmation hearing. This one's particularly notable, in my opinion, because Kennedy, running as a Democrat, flipped as an independent, and was the start of the creation of the Unity Party. And in a lot of ways, it still seems like Kennedy was the top Democrat in the Trump administration. So here he is answering to mostly Democrats who were, somewhat collegial or people that he knew well. And I think this came up during part of the hearings that he would mention, I know these people, I know who we're talking to, and it felt somewhat awkward to have them grilling him the way they did. And there was some particularly awkward and weird moments in here. Lucas, I know you had a chance to catch up on quite a chunk of this. What's your first thoughts on the confirmation of Kennedy? Is he going to get through? Will he have any support from his former Democratic colleagues, or is it going to be a 50-50 tie splitting vote from JD Vance?
It may be a tie splitting vote, but I think that Kennedy should get through. Um, my first thought, well, before you qualified that, my first thought on a confirmation hearing is I grew up on General Hospital and Days of Our Lives, and the reason is that we didn't have live streaming on YouTube or Rumble or X with what was going on in confirmation hearings, because it doesn't get more theatrical. It doesn't get uh, well. Sometimes they're not that great, but Bobby Kennedy was eloquent, and um, he handled some impossible questions and positioning by some of the senators amazingly well. Amazingly well. I enjoyed thoroughly his responses. I thought that he really exposed exposed the senators for their positioning and dishonest and not earnest questioning.
I
Um,
know that I know that some of the criticism that's been leveled at this particular confirmation hearing is that it was fairly obvious which puppet masters are pulling the strings of some of these senators, as they clearly have a bone to pick from their various pharmaceutical or ties within whatever particularly lobbyist groups that seem to have issue with Kennedy.
yeah, there is the there is the gravity of the issue at hand that underlines the theater that we saw yesterday. And you could see it as the interests that are guiding those senators. I think a lot more of it has. I think I think they genuinely see Kennedy as a threat. They are blind or willfully blind to the nuance in his complaints um, about vaccines and about some of the politics that are going on, where they see solely science in the research and the bureaucracy of health and human services. So there certainly is the element of big pharma in the background, but big pharma donates to both sides. And um, with the Republicans, there was this sort of calm acceptance and welcoming. Um, Everyone in the room, Republicans and Democrats, and especially Bobby Kennedy, had an eye on their tongues with regards to what they were saying, and were careful not to offend Donald Trump or the Trump administration. And so yes, big pharma is a problem, but what I saw in the histrionics coming from, especially some of the Democrats, seemed to come from true righteous and moral outrage with grappling with how Kennedy has questioned the authority of Health and Human Services, of the CDC and NIH, and vaccines.
There was that interchange between Kennedy and Senator Warren where she seemed to ask him about whether he was going to be part of the revolving door and take money from the pharmaceutical industry. I think she was trying to give for him an easy question, but it seemed like he's the absolute last person that would ever do that kind of thing. There was just these weird interchanges, especially the one with Bernie Sanders when he was trying to laser in on the childhood vaccines things and just kind of the histrionics of how they're doing this. It definitely reminded me of how you said this is all very theatrical, these types of activities that Congress engages itself in.
Well, so I'm glad that you brought up Warren and Sanders. There are essentially four, and you have Cortez Masto on the screen. Yeah, there were four of the interchanges between the questions from senators and the responses from Kennedy that caught my eye. And you know, the I believe the first of them was Cortez Masto. I re-listened to some of the confirmation hearing after after our episode yesterday. I actually switched directly over to the confirmation hearing and listened to it till its closure, then I went back. But Cortez Masto, what caught me with her was the way that she kept speaking over Bobby Kennedy. And there is something to that, in that the theater from legislative hearings comes from the unacknowledged fact, the truth that this is about legislation. The true power of Congress, and something that Bobby Kennedy reminded a number of senators yesterday, is that they write they write they write the check, and literally they pay for things. And they kept, they many of them asked Bobby Kennedy, "Oh, are you going to defund this? Are you going to defund that?" And he said, "That's your business." But this is where these confirmation hearings get problematic, because it is it. I don't I don't understand how, in the separation of powers, or the original conception of the federal government, we got to this point where the executive had to turn to Congress to ask for confirmation for his selections of the executive branch. Now, I can understand, I could understand them confirming whether they're going to pay for it, but and going back to some of the discussion that we had, and people were considering about recess appointments, that actually is what gets to a recess appointment. If Congress is recessed and the executive appoints members of his staff, then they're just unpaid until Congress convenes to confirm that they're going to pay them. But there's so much there's so much bullshit, I guess, for lack of a better word here, that Kennedy had to bluster through. So you have all of these.
Oh wait, let's go back to this powers thing for a second before we blow past that, because I thought there was an interesting point there. I was trying to wait to see if there was an easy way to sneak in. So let's rewind just a second. So you were talking about how various senators were asking Kennedy what he was going to do and whether he would defund this or that, reminding them of the various powers of our branches of government. But I think in some way these separations of powers and the delegated powers have been significantly muddied. One that really comes to particular mind, although it's not germane to the confirmation of Kennedy as the Health and Human Services top individual, is like the declaration of war. We've had these opportunities where the president just, moves the military around as he will, because Congress doesn't actually want to declare war, and Congress doesn't want to do a lot of what it's responsible for doing, because then they don't have to go home and answer for the things that they've necessarily done. So these erosions and this more lumping of power onto the executive allows Congress to not have to deal with their constituents back home, because they can just blame it all on the executive, because they've delegated too much away from themselves, and they're left with only this sham theater thing that is their role, apparently, is to drag people in front of them with no real consequences when any of this occurs.
That is exactly what happens. And maybe the most alarming is this, what we've seen with the declaration of war, because they put all these questions to the appointees when an administration comes into power, and then across the board, the last thing that they ever do is defund something, and that is their true power. But we see how reticent they are to defund anything, as they as they litigate against the some of the executive orders with the defunding of many of the bureaucratic apparatus that Trump has put on hold for the next 90 days while he tries to probably legislatively or through the actions of the executive, kill some of of these automated processes that the bureaucracy has put in place. So, there, as we talk about this abuse of the difference between the judiciary and the legislative, well, we've talked about the abuse of the distinction between the legislative and the executive, but all of this is also done under this charade that this is a trial, that this is that there is some aspect of justice being brought forth here, and there is none. And by that I mean, when
it almost seems like they're trying to hold Kennedy to account in some ways. They're dragging things that he said, trying to take it out of context, trying to get him to say something that maybe he otherwise wouldn't want to say in this very high pressure type of confirmation setting.
Absolutely. And they often appealed to his vocation as a lawyer to try to trap him into that. And that's something that Elizabeth Warren did that was despicable. And Kennedy was very wary of falling into that trap, because she wanted to have him make these pledges about not engaging in litigation against big pharma, or taking money from for being involved in any court cases in which big pharma was sued, and he was reticent to say so. And he did not go in. I find it interesting always to bear in mind that when it comes to lawyers, what they are advocates of the court. And if you start digging into the weeds of how that interesting sector is structured, it's not a private sector, private enterprise, free market of lawyers get to charge what they want. Yes, in some ways they do, but also there is more control that is exerted by the court. And that is done under this understanding that we have an adversarial system, and that in having that, everyone should have representation. And Kennedy was very wary of making that acknowledgement, because I could see the wheels in his mind turning, and him thinking, I don't want this to be construed in the future as I can't participate in legal action against pharmaceutical companies, or against the bureaucratic agencies that I'm being nominated to lead.
Yeah, and it almost is a very strange thing. It's like, in what way would any of these nominees ever come forward and actually pledge something? It's not like if Senator Warren got him to give these pledges that she'd actually support him. I mean, that is so far outside the bounds of any realistic scenario of what would happen in these confirmation hearings. This horse trading or trying to get these admissions, it's like not binding in any possible sense, and he has no inclination to do any of that, because it's not like he's vying for her vote. She's never going to vote for him for confirmation. And I think as we start to look at some of the other senators that didn't support Kennedy, Warnock in particular, I thought that this political wind that's being set up here, particularly with what Nicole Shanahan says in the top comment here, is pretty interesting.
Yeah, Well, Warnock. I was surprised to see this actually. Going back to Elizabeth Warren, and we haven't talked about Bernie Sanders yet, but some of these senators out are out and out rude to the nominee, to Bobby Kennedy. They're rude on many fronts, and that they're also engaging in this quid pro quo, or this guise of quid pro quo of, oh, I'm going to ask you to make some commitments, and then ostensibly I'm going to give you my vote. This is part of why I see this whole confirmation process as very problematic, and the greatest.
But the political fight that's being set up here is pretty interesting. I mean, Nicole Shanahan, not only with this response to Senator Warnock, but then went on further to shoot a video that she released that said she's ready to bring war over this entire scenario. The political wins of Nicole Shanahan being involved in Kennedy's campaign, I think maybe one of the most interesting political wins that I've seen blow in this country for quite some time, because she comes with a force. She's been supporting various candidates and been funding stuff, so she carries the power of being able to make things happen if she gets wronged in the wrong way.
Well, she does. She has a massive war chest. She's probably one of the richest people in the United States. For those who don't know, Nicole Shanahan was married to one of the CEOs or the leaders of Google. And on top of that, she was Kennedy's nominee. She's been very successful in communicating, and getting.
Likely to run for governor of California, and may very well unseat the sitting governor, who is the anointed next presidential pick, I think.
Absolutely, I would. I'm excited to see that. That'll be an interesting race to see going on in California. But the problem, part of what I see in the problem, um, one senator's only elected every 6 years, and Warnock, I believe his election is coming in the coming midterms, and maybe this is still fresh on people's minds. Um, and maybe there is a lot to the primary threat of unseating some of these candidates. There could be that, but I worry that in some ways this is an empty threat, and at least in the minds of senators, that's how they're looking at it. Um, Elizabeth Warren faced a challenge in John Deaton from Massachusetts, but she was just reelected. She's there for 6 more years. She does not care what she's going to be motivated by what she thinks is right, and what she thinks moves the needle towards her causes. And she was shrill. I don't know if you've seen the picture of her yelling in her question period, but she there was no supposed formality and gratitude and respect that we once expected of senators. And we saw that. I don't know if it ever existed in the House of Representatives. I used to think that senators um, were a posher crowd.
Should it behaved more like the Lords in the House of Lords in Britain? Kind of felt like that was almost their role, or that was the parallel.
Right, but we don't see that anymore, and certainly didn't see it with there was a time too that you expected a little bit more nuance and understanding of the distinction of the powers of the separate branches of government and the separate levels of government. But that's all been eroded too.
Well,
Um,
I blame John Fetterman. You can't show up to the Senate in a hoodie and not expect the rest of the Senate to feel foolish for trying to maintain decorum when you got this guy rolling in wearing street clothes.
and I actually kind of like John Fetterman, and uh, it's
Yeah,
not
but
that I.
he broke it. It's not about, like whether I like it. I'm saying when you have a guy that rolls in and is just like flaunting the decorum that's normally been there, it starts to immediately erode the charade.
But I think John Fetterman breaks it in the right way. I don't care how our senators are dressed. I care that they bring nuanced understanding and reasonable debate to the floor.
It all goes together, man. Once you start to break the dress code, unfortunately we say slippery slope a lot, but like when you start like knocking down parts of the thing that hold up the institution, and some of the pageantry can hold up the institution itself, and when you start to erode certain parts of it, decorum goes a long way in speech, but also in dress and respect to others. I mean, there's a lot of things to blame for how this institution is starting to break down. But I wish the Senate would have maintained its ability to at least rise above some of the morass. But it seems like they're definitely operating much more in the way that the House was traditionally viewed.
I'm looking. John Fetterman can wear his hoodie and shorts. I'm waiting for a senator from Texas to show up in chaps and a cowboy hat and Levi's.
And next thing you know, we're gonna have our female senator showing up in crop tops and a push up bra. Who knows?
I mean, anything is better than the polyester pantsuit. But there you have it. Yeah, it's uh, we've gone on a tangent of clothing. I think what's important here is there
Well,
is no
okay, but but
reasonable
the but
debate.
the reason we're talking about it is because what is the level of decorum that we would expect out of this kind of a confirmation hearing? What is it that we really want to see from the Senate? Do we want Bernie Sanders throwing up pictures of onesies and asking about stuff in this very dramatic way to try to get eyeballs? It to me does evidence the fact that we're living in this short span culture where trying to get these little sound bites and these little clips, that there are whole teams devoted to trying to figure out the best way to do this for each of these senators. I mean, these are very high profile seats. There's very limited number of them, and they hold a position of power within our government, and because there's so few of them, a position of prominence. I mean, being a senator certainly seems like a path to getting on the national stage. That and being a governor, I mean, that's 150 people right there for representing the entirety of this country.
The way the redress to and not just some of the dishonest statements that were made with regards to clips of what Kennedy had said before, and the emotional histrionics of, say, Elizabeth Warren, who was interrupting and yelling and shouting during her question period, or Bernie Sanders, uh, his his foisting of is healthcare a right, and and foisting that sort of personal assessment or personal value on Bobby Kennedy. The way to redress it is not for the candidate or any of the senators to be well dressed, but to do exactly what Kennedy did. And that is the one thing that I took away from this confirmation hearing, was that Bobby Kennedy comported himself. He did not get drawn into the emotional tension that some of the senators brought in their questioning. He was reserved. He gave good faith, and he they accused him of trying to dance around some of their questions, but in some ways some of them were asking him impossible questions, and he addressed the the reasoning behind why their questions were impossible to answer as directly as possible. And he shone in his answers. And during his campaign, he talked about the importance of rhetoric, and the importance of communicating ideas, and how that was a value in his father and his uncle, and how he carried that torch with him. And he brought that to full force against I, in this confirmation hearing, and it was it was as compelling a political act as I've seen since his speech relinquish or bowing out of the presidential race, and joining Trump in the Maha MAGA alliance. So I
I
that
thought
was
I thought another thing to note in the confirmation hearing is the amount of people that were there who were not necessarily part of the political apparatus and the political machine. There's a lot of regular people in this confirmation hearing, right? I think there was a lot of people lined up outside to see Kennedy speak. To in some ways, I think this speaks a lot to the whole idea that Trump being elected was a unity party thing. It's easy to get caught up in saying this is all GOP, but in a lot of ways, this was a coalition that came together to form a new kind of government, and Kennedy is one of the pillars of this. And I don't take it lightly to say he's kind of the top Democrat in the Trump administration because I mean, he was a Democrat forever, and he only switched to run as an independent because the Democrats wouldn't let him run a fair campaign, and he made no bones about bringing that to light. So, what has happened here with Kennedy not being allowed to run, with Nicole Shanahan getting super upset, I think this wedge right here that is forming in the traditional Democratic stronghold is going to have some of the strongest ramifications for the next few years, especially with Gavin Newsom not running for governor uncontested in the next cycle, her calling out a bunch of senators that she's previously supported. This may be the next fracturing of the Democratic Party into maybe three pieces now instead of just the two that we've discussed at some length with the Bernie progressives kind of splitting off from the center line Democrats.
apart from the policies of Republicans and Democrats and the splits there, as I think about the responses that Kennedy gave in that confirmation hearing, and then I think about other members of the Trump administration and Donald Trump himself, and I'm thinking of I don't know if you caught the clip of Marco Rubio, who Secretary of State or Trump's Secretary of State, you know, a couple of months ago, he was caught in the halls of Congress by some Free Palestine, anti-Israel protesters, and the Biden administration was one of censorship and dissemblance, and Republicans, and that was long the political tactic of addressing some of these. Marco Rubio stopped and stopped, walking down the hall, didn't try to walk on and ignore them, stop and turns to this person holding up their camera, and he directly addressed that protester, and the protester was like, "Don't take my phone, don't try to stop me. I have the right of free speech." And Marco Rubio said, "Oh no, I'm not here to do that. I'm here. I'm turning to face your camera to give you my answers because I want you to post this and I want everybody to understand where I'm at." And then when I turn and look at the opening lines of the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt, whenever she did the first White House briefing, um, there are some policies that earlier administrations would have demurred rather than to directly address, and she blazed right in, and you know took everything on the nose, so to speak. I mean, she just went and addressed everything, and didn't hem and haw and wait to change the subject. She went right to the point. And then I think about Hegseth, who Hegseth has been not confirmed. We still wait to see Kash Patel, but I turn around and look at what I know about them leading in, and they sat down for long form interviews, and they were unequivocal with what their views were and what sort of changes that they wanted to see in government. So I think this is part of a change in the way that we conduct politics that Democrats are going to need to grasp onto. And turning back to the confirmation hearing, this is you know Warnock's Warnock's tweet that he was not going to confirm or vote yay for the confirmation of Kennedy also surprised me because he had sort of a kind exchange. And he stated some things. He made allusions to previous conversation that Kennedy had, thanked him for coming in to talk to him, mischaracterized some phrases or some things that Kennedy had said prior to it, but then allowed Kennedy to correct him. And I was thinking as all this was going on, oh, Warnock is painting a case for why he's going to vote to affirm Kennedy, because the CDC is in Atlanta. Warnock is a senator from Georgia. He wants to set up a good relationship going forward. But he had a genial interchange with Kennedy, and then turn around and 45 minutes later tweeted, "I'm voting no."
That's the Democratic shadow puppet masters right there, exerting their influence. They absolutely are not going to allow any defections of votes in the Senate. To think that any of these senators have autonomy, it's just that's not how this works. I think that this is exactly what's going on here. Is even though he may have been inclined to do that, he probably got some strong words saying you absolutely will not cross the line and vote for Kennedy, no matter what you might want to do.
Well, he messed up there, and not just because Nicole Shanahan is going to be campaigning against him, but I think that the general American is tired of inauthenticity. And if Warnock had been more against Kennedy, they would have wanted to hear that in the confirmation hearing. His politeness was a plus, but his the disjuncture of his tone and that conversation and what he's now purporting to vote, I don't think that's gonna play very well.
It's not, and this is exactly what is starting to be discussed in the Democratic Party, that they have got to start speaking more genuinely. They have to start connecting with the American populace in a more genuine way, or they are absolutely going to continuously lose races, and this is going to get very ugly until they figure this out. You've even seen where some of the top political strategists within the Democratic Party have said you have to start speaking more like normal people, or you're not going to win elections. And this kind of thing, I think, is along that same line. You can't have this double-faced way that you're operating. You can't say one thing and then just completely toe the party line every time something comes up. If you don't have a little bit of autonomy and you don't have the ability to genuinely represent your constituency, and you're just going to get swooped up into the Democratic machine, then probably going to start losing handily.
It'll be interesting going back to Fetterman, because Fetterman seems to be an outlier. I used to think AOC was an outlier in the Democratic Party because she was authentic, but um, I've come to worry about her authenticity in the last session of the House.
I think it's hard to maintain it, honestly. And the longer you're around the game, the more easy it is to just get sucked into it. When you first come in, you've got all the bluster, fire of youth, the ignorance of how things actually work. The deeper you get into it, the more likely you are to get trapped by the machine.
Well, this is again why I find Fetterman and his shorts and his hoodie so very interesting, because I think it's more. I when I saw him at Trump's inauguration, I thought this is Professor Higgins from My Fair Lady. Um, he's not disrespecting Trump by wearing shorts and a hoodie. This is his message to everybody, that he would have worn this to the Biden administration, or he would have worn this to the Harris inauguration, had that
It's
been the way
it's
of.
it's his virtue signaling to his base. Say, I'm still connected
Absolutely,
to
but
you.
it's
I am still
also
connected.
and it's a warning to the lobbyists and the behind the scenes political powers in Washington. And what he's trying to say to them is, I cannot be bought. And so as we go forward,
It's like a peacock spreading its feathers out. It's like
oh, absolutely. One of my
strutting around the ground and scraping the ground in the proverbial fighting match.
Yeah, I mean, and I would much prefer it if, I mean, turn around and look at another sort of ostentatious dresser in Washington D.C., Roger Stone. Roger Stone also dresses like he wants to dress and dresses ridiculously, sort of at the other end of the spectrum, but as a warning to say, I'm not going to play politics, or not I'm going to play politics. I'm not going to give up on the way that I see the world, and I'm going to fight for, throwing the baby out, not whatever. I won't go into that quote. Anyway, Fetterman, though, as as we recede from, or as we move away into the Trump administration from the inauguration, whenever I saw what he was wearing at the inauguration, and I wish that I had gotten a chance to listen to his exchange with Kennedy in the confirmation hearing, but I have wondered if we would see him defect from the Democrats, and if the Democrats are going to continue their inauthenticity and sort of their backroom deal making, and some of the things that have long been deeply ingrained in the Democratic Party. I wonder how long he will stay with them. And I've thought that we could see a defection of Fetterman from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. So, sort of all I've got to reminisce on the Kennedy confirmation hearing.
I guess I got to put you on the spot. Is he, like, again, I want to ask this question. Do you think he's getting confirmed, and what's your prediction for the vote? Like, because we really have to get you to start weighing in on some polymarket stuff, but just so our listeners can have a little skin in the game here, giving a prediction. What's your thought? Is it 50-50 with JD Vance casting the tie vote, or do you think we're going to have any kind of an unexpected vote here? I'm going to pin you down because I'm calling it at 50-50 with JD Vance tying the calling.
I mean, I don't know what the vote count is, and that's part of the charade of Congress, but I think there's 100% chance that Kennedy is the next Secretary for Health and Human Services.
So he's getting confirmed, but you're thinking that there may be some defections in the Republican Party, and they're actually going to cast a vote for him?
Well, it'll be interesting to see if any of the Republican senators actually vote against Kennedy, especially with the. I think
I don't think there's a chance in hell that happens, because that would be a casting a vote against Trump. I don't think that there's a GOP
against Trump, and also against this growing populist movement, and I would be less surprised to see some Democratic senators cast in favor of Kennedy. I think that there's a good chance
the GOP has to know that if Kennedy hadn't joined this ticket, that Trump would have been in serious trouble. That Kennedy would have pulled votes from Trump.
Well, but also I think there are going to be Democratic senators who and other Democrats who begin to look at the success and the popularity of the Trump administration and say, I want to, and not only that, but turn around and look at the catastrophe of the Democratic National, of the Biden withdrawal and the lack of a democratic process and the selection of Harris and Walz in that campaign. They're going to turn around and look at that, and also look at the alliance between Cheney and the Rhino Republicans. And we're also coming out of the involvement in the war in Ukraine, and we have a ceasefire in Palestine and Israel, yet to see how that plays out. But some of the fervor and the jingoism that has gone on in the last administration is going to fade, and when that does so, I think we're going to see Democrats looking to jump ship, if not necessarily change party lines, to begin to reach across the aisle. And I think Kennedy is a very likely person to see that happen under, because they are going to turn and stop these histrionics of false equivalations and about anti-vaccine, and to turn and say, oh, we do need to question the science. We do need to question the conflicts of interest of corporations and money in the bureaucratic system, and that's an easy win for them. So they should be. I would expect that we see that, It will also be interesting to see in the wake of that how Tulsi Gabbard's nomination goes.
That is the
Um,
one that I am watching most closely next. I want to see how this goes because it's going to be another one of these setups of the Democrats talking to the second top Democrat in the Trump administration. This is essentially what's going to be going on here.
well, and if we see the Democrats like hold together and dig in their heels in the Kennedy nomination, in which case I would imagine we see it go back to maybe Vance voting him in. But regardless, I think that no Republican is going to is going to be the John McCain and waltz in there and take the political headwinds of voting no against Kennedy. So I think I think if the Democrats
Yeah,
put their
can you
heels
can
in,
you imagine can you imagine the wrath that would be visited upon the
I
The GOP
6 years.
senator that breaks the
Yeah,
line?
6 years wouldn't be long enough, and the only senators that would do so would be the ones who were just elected in the last election. Um, but no, it will be. I think that we will see the Democrats break in this nomination, and if we do so, I think that that bodes well for Tulsi Gabbard's nomination. So we'll see how it plays out.
All right. Well, great discussion about this today. I'm super excited about the episode tomorrow. So we will see you tomorrow on FOMO. And remember, if you're catching this on X, we have a YouTube channel. So the FOMO show is where you can find us. It's linked on my profile, I think on Lucas's, and also on Rusty's. You can also find FOMO the show on the on X itself. So give a like, subscribe, follow. Thanks very much for listening.
And where would you want to?